all of that, right, and the usual optimism that comes with stuff on climate change, what can we do about it, right? What can maybe you do about it? What should the international community do? And the truth is that we do have a kind of solid idea of what's lacking in the world. And firstly, across all of those areas on there, climate policy, development spending, peace building, all of those sectors need to get an awareness that you cannot do climate work in an isolated way. You cannot do conflict and kind of peace building work in a matter which acts as if climate change doesn't happen. Those times have kind of passed, right? And we need to really work on climate and conflict sensitivity across programming. And the level we're kind of talking about here at the moment, it isn't that difficult, right? At the moment we're talking about, is there an impact assessment? Is there one person with a climate change background who has looked over your peace building plan? Are you talking in mediation to people about the natural environment? Are you asking questions about the role that kind of, say, agricultural production and kind of changing rainfall patterns? How does that impact you? And what would this agreement, what would these policies do to your interaction with kind of the natural world and what you kind of take and produce from that? And we can dive much deeper later, but building that awareness and kind of making sure that development and peace building and climate change programming, it has shows an interest in that and is able to kind of integrate itself into a climate change world. Is really important. And that also means getting climate finance to countries that are fragile and countries that have seen conflict. I have crunched the numbers on this for I think the 10 insights, and maybe we can take a guess. So the 10 most fragile countries, and you've seen the slides, there's massive overlap in terms of climate vulnerability and fragility, right? The 10 most fragile countries, how many percent of kind of global climate finance do you think those 10 countries receive? You can just shout out any number and we'll kind of collect 3.
Like development, like the Green Fund kind of fund?
Yeah.
Less than 10%.
Less than 10%? Any more?
Around 5%.
Around 5?
More optimistic, 30%?
30%. Okay, you're the best in this round. Unfortunately, it's 4.5% of all climate funding goes to areas which to those 10 most fragile countries, and all of those again really serious climate change impact across all of them. That's a lot of countries in the Sahel where kind of temperatures will really spike, and where livelihoods are already really being strained by climate events. Training and capacity building, right? There is, I've said that before, the kind of language between those two fields doesn't translate well. A lot of people in either of those sectors haven't really considered climate change before, and doing something just to give them an idea of the type of risks, of what can be done, and getting across different sectors an awareness at the very least, if not an ability to counter that, and an awareness of climate security is so important if we want to achieve that first thing, kind of get climate and conflict sensitive policy. And the last one goes back to knowing what will really happen, and that idea of context specificity. If you want to implement a certain program in a certain country, in a certain area, having a kind of risk assessment methodology, having maybe early warning capabilities is really important. And so probably the sequencing of those should go risk assessments, training, and then getting the climate and conflict sensitivity. But in terms of impact, right? I think this is the order. Although again, ideally doing all of those, will give us the kind of largest returns here. And even if we don't know the kind of precise impact of climate change and security in a certain area, we can build a program which at least kind of talks to people about those risks and doesn't just do. I will skip the papers, but if you are interested, bunch of kind of different work, a bunch of different papers written and out there, certainly also by other organizations on the kind of policy angle to this. This is a paper on Lake Chad and kind of what the international community can do here. This is a much broader, very high level. If you have 5 minutes, have a look at this. Paper on kind of UN organs and their response and what can be done. So appointing a rapporteur on climate security, integrating this into kind of UN planning methodologies is something really promising. This is kind of on multilateral and kind of unilateral international development cooperation, and the paper up there is on climate migration in Central Asia, and also, again, attaining that kind of level of integrated policy where mobility doesn't kind of happen outside of, of urban development plans, doesn't happen outside of climate policy, doesn't happen outside of a strategy against conflict. This was amazing. It was the one opportunity I got to travel for my job very, very spontaneously to Rabat in Morocco. This was a 2-day event with a training. Unfortunately, you can't see it, but we held a training on the first day for people in the Moroccan government, but then also across the kind of governments in the Sahel region and the countries kind of bordering Morocco on getting integrated climate policy, climate programming and conflict programming off the ground. That was a lot of fun. And then the next day we had a kind of high-level consultation with different presidential advisors, which are the bulk of people on this picture, but also people from international organizations in the region, really discussing, right, how does climate security, to your knowledge, play out in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Senegal, and what do you think is a viable policy here, knowing what we have discussed now, kind of having done the training, having received an input from us, and what is something the international community should do as well. So those roundtables, funded by the German government, with the representative here, and there's naive, unexperienced me on the side there. Why they let me on the picture, I don't know. Right, and kind of having a conversation. What is the kind of support you want? What is the stuff that you really want to do yourself, and where do you think kind of opportunities lie to get this moving and get this going? And those conversations are hugely important, and it was fascinating to be able to participate in those discussions. I will try my best, since we started late, to kind of wrap this up quickly now. Politics, where do we stand? And finally, I have good news. Climate security is really, really hot right now. Not to, kind of get away from the formal language here, but so much is happening, right? And the kind of past 1-2 years have seen a massive increase in attention. Governments have really got this on their agenda, especially in kind of Europe, and thankfully, again, the US. International fora are discussing this now. This was an event held at COP26 in Glasgow, a discussion where you had Wolfgang Ischinger from the Munich Security Conference chairing it. You had Jens Stoltenberg from NATO, USAID joined the conversation, the Foreign Minister of Kenya is down here, the UK hosting this, Niger, UAE, Malta, Barbados, all of which are countries either impacted by this or who will be on the Security Council. And getting that to that level and having a discussion on it is an incredible gain. And I don't think something that would have been possible, say 3-5 years ago. And that is despite the G7 mandating a report on this in 2015 and so much research going on. But something has really happened where this has taken off. That was a conference in 2019. We have got the John Kerry down there, the German foreign ministers of Maldives, and a bunch of kind of countries at risk here who've been very vocal about this. So those fora and discussions have really picked up, and there is a lot of value in that. International organizations have noticed as well that something needs to happen in the UN, at UNEP, at UN Women, the climate security mechanism at the UN. All of those are kind of moving, and they have put climate security on their agenda. It goes across kind of other communities of practice as well. And militaries also realize, especially I think the US military, the DoD now has a kind of strategy on climate security as well, because they have realized that having a lot of kind of security assets, and this is a value-free kind of story here, but having military assets in regions that will see flooding and that will see rising temperatures and potentially very large destructions from hurricanes is probably a security risk and something that you need to move on. And that discussion has certainly started as well. And the best news here, although this has been thrown up in the air as per usual, is that a resolution at the UN Security Council acknowledging climate change and security linkages and has never been so close. So we've tried this for multiple years. Germany has tried, the Trump administration has shot them down. I've tried not to say the name of the former president for weeks now, and I have failed. Very unfortunate. Right, but Ireland and Niger have moved on this now. They really want to table a resolution. There is a high risk that kind of Russia and China will shut that down or will veto it. So the question at the moment is, do they table it? Do they not table it? But I think the last thing I heard, and you can follow Richard Gowan from the International Crisis Group on Twitter for this. He's been covering it really well. I think what they're now doing is they're giving this resolution to like hundreds of countries that have come out in favor of kind of climate security language before, get them the signatures on that, kind of supporters, and then put it into the UNSC and kind of hope that that will carry political momentum to make something happen, which would be a big, big step, right? It would mean a lot if that kind of body recognized that there is a linkage between climate change and security, because again, you know, the UNSC has a huge role in kind of defining where these conversations will go politically. And policy implementation, you know, is happening. We're seeing papers commissioned. Countries do want to know what to do with their programming. And again, a bit of an illustration. This is our 2020 Digital Berlin Climate and Security Conference. You know, with a good number of organizations on here. This is the 2021 conference. And a big shout out to my colleagues who've pulled that one off. The amount of organizations, right, just between these two is amazing. And those organizations, for a very large part, you know, they have reached out to Adelphi, to the Foreign Office, saying, we really want to do something on this. We want to showcase our work. There's something we can talk about here. And you know, seeing that increase in interest again has real kind of value, and this happens across kind of communities, right? There's the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security on there. The Wilson Center, the World Food Program, UN Women, UNU, you know, kind of international organizations as well, CGIR, which focuses on food policy, and that is really, really heartening to see and hear some impressions from our digital conference. In 2020, we did the first segment kind of from a studio. A bunch of people tuned in on laptops here, the foreign minister up here, me trying to moderate something at the conference, and maybe just a bit of an impression, something to look at if you kind of wonder what those conferences look like behind the scenes. This will be on a recording now, but phone calls happened behind the scenes to make sure that various dignitaries kind of actually dial in at the right time, and please don't close their laptop after they've said something or similar things. It was a fun and very stressful day, but yeah, a really amazing opportunity, and kind of pulling this off in June, was it, of 2020, an incredible experience at a time when everybody was trying to figure out those conferences, and feel free to kind of ask questions about that if you can. Okay, final note. You know, everything is not. There is some English saying on this. Fun and games, is that it? I don't know. Right, Security Council opposition might not be overcome. There is skepticism still about kind of that kind of language, right? Are we securitizing climate change, and what does that mean for kind of international cooperation? When, you know, we say, oh, climate change and development interlinked can lead to risk, does that mean that we don't do just development spending anymore, that everything suddenly becomes about risks from certain people in certain areas, which, you know, would be a real, real big problem, right? And it is understandable that kind of countries are concerned about this. Now, I don't think that is a risk, because something that has emerged kind of for us in the language was, it's not about securitizing climate change, it's about climatizing security, right? Making sure that the stuff that is already happening, right, is informed by climate change. We're not, you know, we're not shifting the language on something massively here, but we're kind of trying to build better linkages, if you will. Stuff on language and terminology, really briefly, it matters a lot to certain communities of practice whether something is a threat, is a risk, or is kind of an interlinkage, just because, again, that is tied to politics. And we do really need to get going on kind of programming and make sure that this work is put into action, kind of moves from the discussions, which, again, really important, to the things that happen on the ground, and that do support. Resources, this is just a bunch of Adelphi websites, but I do want to say a lot of organizations, SIPRI, NUPI, SIPRI, a huge climate think tank, NUPI, a huge conflict think tank, NUPI, Norwegian think tank, New America organization here in the US, the International Committee for the Red Cross, and many, many more have put out really good reports and things to look at if you care. Adam Day is a faculty at SIPA. We have written a paper together. He is absolutely fascinating, incredibly smart guy with a lot to say about this and the background kind of conflict resolution. And if you do want to learn more, I think he'd be happy to kind of hear from you as well. Okay, Q&A. Sorry, less time than I wanted, but this is what happens when you see a typo at a climate think tank. We did publish something very briefly that had the word seal level rise on it. This is what happened, and thanks for paying attention and showing.